Hey everybody, welcome to the Purpose People podcast. Today I've got Jeremy Woodall with us and he's got an incredible story. So we're just going to chat, we're going to converse and we're going to see what he's doing now, what he was doing in the past and also what the future looks like. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Daryl.
Yeah, so we met through networking, which is often how I meet people anyway. And we kind of hit it off, and then you come and visited us all the way from Wales over to Bristol.
Yep.
I had a breakfast, and I thought, I've got to get this guy on the podcast. So finally,
Great.
2025, here you are. So, Jeremy, obviously we're talking about purpose and stuff.
Yes.
And you've kind of like done, funnily enough, I got a lot of synergy with the fact that my parents have come out of the forces and that sort of stuff, and you've been in that as well. Yeah. So let's start. Was that always the plan at school? You said one day I'm going to grow up and I'm going to join the army, or was it, we ended up there? How did it go?
Yes. Actually, it was a plan quite early on in my life.
Okay.
But I had a grandfather who had been in the Navy and then the Army at the end of the war. And then he went to the post office out in Hong Kong, and that's where my mother was born. Okay. But that's the only kind of connection we had to the military, and I certainly wasn't brought up with stories of military or anything. But probably around about the age of 13, 14, when we were sat down in school, you remember I don't know if you went through it, but we used to have those careers advisors interviews. And, And I just remember thinking there's nothing really that I resonated with apart from the idea of joining the forces.
Right. Okay.
And so it started for me there when I started looking into it. And as we were talking about earlier, the RAF was one of the first ones I looked at. But ultimately, I ended up focusing on the Royal Marines. They just seemed to be a harder unit to get into and did some more interesting stuff. And I think also one of the drivers was as a fighting force, they cover so many areas, or so many jobs you could do within that. I mean, it's in essence, it's the Navy's army, as it were. So everything the army does, the Marines try to do, even on a much smaller scale. Right. So you got a real chance of having a diverse career if you went down that line. But early on, I think I was very active and I loved sport. Yeah. And this idea of being in the forces just seemed to resonate with me as a young man.
I remember, like me as a kid growing up. I mean, you probably wouldn't get away with it now, but we always used to have sticks and guns and there'd be like 50 kids playing in the street, playing army, and
I know,
and climbing through trees, or as we touched on it, doing jungle warfare, and it was just like natural. It was the thing that we all did. It was just like, what are we going to do today? We're going to play war.
Yeah, I think we were really lucky, our generation. I think we were exposed to a lifestyle which was we were sort of kicked out at the beginning of the day during school holidays, and you'd be called back in for supper, and that was it. But the rest of the day, you were almost feral, running around, and I think you can learn a lot about yourself, putting yourself in those situations. Yeah. And I did Cub Scouts, I guess, early on, which I loved, and then went into the ACF, and then later on went into the CCF, the Combined Cadet Forces. Okay. So I had that kind of military introduction. Yeah. And the final 2 years of school, I also did a number of courses that were run by the CCF. So the military, in order to attract people in, the different arms will offer different courses you can go and do during summer holidays, which was a small amount of money, but big experiences. Yeah. And that really cemented my time, because I 16 years old, I think the first time I went down to the Commando Training Centre, Royal Marines, and just got thrashed around there. And I think as a young boy, you go into that environment and you just, wow. And all these very fit men everywhere. And it's quite a thing. And they, it's very gentle what they do with you, but at the time you think, God, this is actually quite full on.
Yeah, of course. But then they've got a much bigger picture at mind as well, haven't they? Yeah.
They have, yeah. And the British military have been training people for millennia. Yeah. So they've got that down pat, really. And you're training for a very specific thing. You're training for, certainly in the Royal Marines, for mass attrition. Ultimately, you're going out to potentially be the sort of fighting arm of the country, but there's so much more to the Marines than just that.
So when you obviously joined, was it straight from school that you joined the Marines?
I had a gap year, as it were, because what happened to me was, and this is relevant to my latest story, as it were. But my mother suffers with bipolar.
Okay.
So from a very young age, we had that in the family, and those kind of challenges that she went through that then ripple into the family have a deep effect.
Yeah.
And it kind of sparked my interest in mental well-being and emotional well-being, which is where I'm at now.
Yeah.
But at the time of my first selection for the Royal Marines, I had been looking after my mother over a 2 or 3 month period. So there was times when she was sectioned and times when we as a family would come round and look after her.
Yeah.
So I was at the age where I was just finished school, and I was doing my training for my first sort of selection down at the Commando Training Centre. And when I went down there, although I was physically quite fit, I simply wasn't switched on in the way I should have been. Yeah. So my first set of interviews, I got a call back. So they didn't say, we don't want you. They just said, look, you're quite young. We need to mature you a bit. So we can either defer it for a year or you can do a course in a number of months. And I remember at the time I was quite devastated, but as soon as I was back on the train, within 10 minutes before I even reached Exeter, which was the main station, I had already decided I was going to go travelling. Okay. And take the opportunity to just take a year and do that.
So it wasn't like the Steve Rogers thing where they went to the army and they thought, he's not big, he's not superhuman yet.
Oh, not quite. Yeah, that would have been great, wouldn't it?
And he come back and he's like bigger again.
Give you that injection and out you come looking amazing. Yeah, I seem to miss that one.
Yeah. So you're going travelling then, and I guess that when you cemented that, you probably thought, well, I'm going to be in the Marines for a while, kind of thing. So let's go and see. So when you say travelling, because obviously back then it probably wasn't so much as a thing as it was now. You know, a lot of people go and travel to find themselves.
Yeah.
Where did you think you'd go? Did you say, right, I'm just going to go as far as I possibly can, or was it?
Well, I think my mindset at the time was there was a kind of a route that people did. They would make their way out to Australia and then come back, and that would be their travel.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do that. And I had a friend from school who was a South African who'd spent 2 terms with us in our final year at school. And he was living down in Johannesburg, or just south of Johannesburg, on a farm. So I just had the plan. I got a single ticket out there, and I was going to go and just make it up as I went along.
Wow.
So I flew out there, but literally a week before I flew out, he got drafted into the army. So he disappeared from the scene. So I ended up spending time on his farm, and then I hitchhiked around South Africa along the garden route, then up into Zimbabwe and Zambia. And then I came back into South Africa, managed to get myself on a cargo ship from Port Elizabeth in South Africa across to Hong Kong, where I had family.
Wow.
And then I worked in Hong Kong to earn extra money and went on to Japan.
Wow.
And I went, my aim actually was quite early on was to get to Japan, because I had an interest in martial arts, but bizarrely, not so much the combative nature of martial arts and the physical side of it, more the meditation and mental side of it.
Yep.
And I don't know if you know much about ninjutsu, but as a martial art, it was outlawed in Japan, and it was still sort of a little bit underground in Japan when I got out there. But I managed to get out and find a ninjutsu school and go and do some training with them.
Wow.
So that was my drive to do that. But it was a real sense of freedom is what I remember it as.
Yeah, And one would argue, I mean, I don't know, was it considered dangerous going out South Africa and up through Zimbabwe and places at the time? Or was it fairly peaceful? Because I mean, obviously there was a lot of stuff going on.
There was quite a bit going on.
Yeah.
It was literally, I was out there just before Mandela was released.
Oh wow, okay.
And so that was the period when there was a lot of trouble in the townships that historically we now know was driven by the South African government at the time.
Yeah.
But I didn't really come across that. And there was only one occasion where I had a bit of a moment where I was walking down a road and a truck came past me and people started shouting at me. And I was like, oh, that's a bit of a moment. But otherwise, I guess I was going to say lucky, but I did some stuff that you look back on and say, oh, I shouldn't have really survived that, should I? You know.
But it's that thing of like ignorance is bliss in a way that you know if you'd known everything that you were meant to know, you probably never have gone.
Yeah.
So.
And also I think in hindsight, because I've spent quite a bit of time in dangerous places since then, but with training, you realise that if you are present in a location and you're paying attention to what's going on around you, you can keep yourself safe, especially if your mindset is about being safe.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel quite right to go down there, or you pay attention to this person and that person. I had a strange experience where I was in the middle of Zimbabwe, and I was trying to get to. I'd been given an address of a friend's farm, of the family that I'd been living with in South Africa, and I was in Harare at the time, at the bus station, and the bus station weren't used by white people at all. And I was looking particularly white because I had white shorts on and a white T-shirt.
Yeah, okay.
And I was waiting
Probably
for this.
sunburn as well.
Yeah, exactly. Big red face. I think I was 17 and a half or 18 years old.
Yeah.
Full of naivety and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. But I managed to get a bus to go out with the language barrier as well, to go out towards this farm. And I had this address on this bit of paper. The bus in that part of the world, I don't know if you've been down there, but it's sort of 6 o'clock. It's like someone turns the light out, anywhere near the equator, almost on the dot. It's like someone just switches the light off. You don't get that sort of dawn or dusky type light. It just goes dark. And I'm still sat in this bus trying to find out and talk to somebody that knew that there was this stop. Anyway, it turns out that there was 2 other guys that were on the bus that were getting off and they knew where I was going to. So great, I jumped off with them. So we jumped off the bus and the bus disappears. I'm stood in the dark with these 2 guys and we're waiting for I don't know what. And they start hitching. And I'm saying, but we're going to this location, right? Oh, yeah, no problem. They manage to flag over a lorry. And they start scrambling on the back of this lorry. So we jump in the back of this lorry, which is full of lime. So instantly I become even whiter because there was all white dust going over me. Pitch black. And we go in this lorry for about 20 minutes or so. And then the lorry stops and we jump off again. And I'm thinking, now I'm in the middle of nowhere, surely.
Yeah.
And there was one of these wooden huts which had a small pool table in and a bar in, and so there was black Africans, these guys I was with, and I'm trying to befriend them because I'm thinking, please don't kill me, I'm quite young and a bit defenseless. We go in and I offer to buy them a drink and I buy them a Coke each, and I'm trying to ask them again through broken language, how do we get to this place? Oh, no worries, and just take your time. And then he decides to walk off, or they say to me, come on, we're going this way. And at that moment, we started walking off the main road down this bush. And I did have a moment in my head where I was thinking, this could be really stupid. I'm following these 2 guys into the middle of this bush. What is going on? And we were walking for a good 10 minutes or so. And we eventually get to, and I couldn't even see this hut, but we arrive and there's a guy in a hut with a radio. And they drop me off with this guy. And, oh, yes, no problems. He radios through to the people who have no idea I'm coming, because in those days there was no telephones or mobiles or anything. And they said, yep, they're on their way. They'll be 45 minutes because, this farm is another half an hour's drive away.
Right, okay.
So I survived that. And I had a few moments like that throughout the trip. But I guess mindset was, I'm going to be fine. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think in when I reflect, when I was younger, I remember me and my brother had been to a concert, and we got split up, and it was like trying to. I think we had enough money to together get a taxi, but on our own we didn't have enough money, right? So I was like, I've lost him. I don't know where he's gone. And then, we weren't mobile phone at the time. So it's like, okay, we're going to have to meet him back home. And I don't know where I was because I got lost a little bit from where the concert venue was, that side of Bristol. And this Somalian kid goes, oh, I'll take you to where you need to get to. So I'm going down one place, then going down another. And all of a sudden I'm starting to go down some lanes. And everything in me just said, run. So I just went, what's that over there like that? And he looked, and then I just literally ran as fast as I possibly could. And then I think it was I've been running for about 15, 20 minutes, and then started walking, and then I got to a certain point and then got a taxi back. And funnily enough, he had done exactly the same from a different angle. And we got back and we exchanged notes. But I think there is that certain intuition within you where you just know something's not quite right. And I think that's when I felt, you know what, this is not good. I'm out of here.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in that. I really am. And I think for that to work, you've got to be in touch with your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of the struggles nowadays are people are disengaged from themselves to some external device or something. And if you don't spend time like we did as kids out in nature, running around, being in the world and surviving in the world, doing stupid things, then you don't build those skills. If I feel very sorry for this generation that have been stuck indoors, especially during like the COVID period, just stuck inside and not interacting with other people and building that kind of, social resilience, maybe, getting out and being able to engage and judge people and build up that sense of self, really.
Well, I think that initiatives like Duke of Edinburgh, and like my daughter's just done the silver one now. She's enrolled on the gold one, and it's stuff like that takes in even more of a preeminence, or should do, because they're just not getting that kind of opportunity, in life in general. And I mean, even now, we used to play football till it was dark. Yeah. Now it's like, as soon as the sun goes down, you better come in, because you don't know who's going to be out there. So very different culture. And as I said, you talked about, my parents used to go, there's your bikes, get them in the morning, see you later, and then shut the door, and that's it. Yeah. You would come back for tea, and that was it. So, which I enjoyed. It was like an adventure all the time. And
I think so.
We've maybe lost that spirit of adventure.
Yeah, and I wonder whether things have really changed so dramatically, or whether it's just mindset.
I think it's mindset. Yeah. I really do. I think there is an element of mindset, and there is about having your wits about you. But I definitely think it's definitely a mindset thing. So you've been traveling. You've been to Japan. Yeah. Yeah. What year would have that been? Japan.
That would have been 1989.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was that like? Because I've read a lot about Phil Knight from Shoe Dog.
Okay.
And he when he originally started what would become Nike, he was buying Asics trainers and importing them in. And I mean, he was going sort of like late 50s, then early 60s, telling his story. And he said there was that hangover from the Americans and the war and all that sort of stuff. And he hadn't seen the recovery. He said, I was walking in and there's buildings still left over. I guess when you went there, was it like the technological force what we see nowadays, where you got the bullet train and super clean and...
Yes, I mean, I'm talking about 35 years ago now, isn't it? But it's so things would have changed. But it was a very different culture, and it was the sense of it very safe. Yeah, there was a lot of interest in white man who was a foot taller than most of the people that were there. But it was still very polite, and I found it fascinating. I loved it. I really did. A real sense of organisation and cleanliness.
That was the thing, and that's what I've from people that I've known who've gone out there, that's the thing that it's almost like catches them a bit by surprise, just how clean and how organised everything is. Yeah. By comparison to the Tube.
Yeah, and I think the little bit I know about their history, that there's a lot of discipline within their culture.
Correct. Yeah.
And that still runs through nowadays, but. Yeah, it was a good experience. And I wasn't out there for as long as I'd like to be. It was expensive. I mean, that's what I remember. Yeah. And my plan at the time was to go and teach English. Okay. Which at that period in time was quite lucrative for an English speaker to go out there. Yeah. But whether this was luck or good fortune, 2 months before I went out there, I was still in Hong Kong. The government changed the criteria and said, look, you must have a certain qualification in order to teach English out there. So I arrived out there and there wasn't an opportunity. In fact, the only job opportunity I got offered was to be a topless barman in some bar in Tokyo, which I turned down. But so in the end, it turned into more of a...
It's something you can fall back on.
Yeah, exactly. And I did seriously look at coming back to the UK to earn money and then go back out there as a student on a student visa and work out there. But as it turned out, I came back, retook my selection for the Royal Marines, and then ended up joining the Royal Marines.
So now you've had that complete and utter freedom to go wherever you want. Yeah, I guess was it the opposite, or did it feel like the opposite? Because you're doing discipline and you dig this. You can wake up, you eat, then you do this. How did you adjust? Was it a big shock to the system, or was it I'm on an adventure?
I think it was. I was on. I think on an adventure, maybe not, but it was certainly I think if you're going to commit yourself to something like the Royal Marines, then you know what you, to a degree, you know what you're letting yourself in for.
Yeah, of course.
And you're excited about what you can get from it.
Yeah.
And the officer training in the Marines was at that time the longest military training in I think globally at that time. Certainly it's really intense mentally, physically.
Yeah.
But you're surrounded by this excellence, and you're with some incredibly good individuals.
Yeah.
The selection for officers is very thorough to get you even through the door. And we lost about half of the people that we started off with.
Wow.
And it costs a lot of money to put someone through training. So they don't want to lose anybody. And on that day one, everybody's committed. And that was really the seeds for what I'm doing now, in terms of understanding, although we had incredibly fit individuals who were very switched on, brilliant individually, didn't make it through training. So why was that?
Yeah. Do you think that was? Do you think a lot of that was mental?
That was my conclusion. This is all down to the mind, because if you're not fully committed mentally, then those little things like injuries or it being cold, they start niggling at you. And
of course.
One of the things you did learn through training is that you really have to work as a team. If you don't, and you're outside of that group, it's very isolating, and it's very hard to keep up with the group.
Yeah.
Training moves very, very quickly.
How long was the training for?
It was 18 months.
18 months.
Yeah. The last 6 months you were in a unit, so you're still being trained, as it were. But was that right? Yeah, 18 months.
And then once you had completed the training, obviously you get through, which is incredible anyway to get through. And then they station you. Did they pick them? And where did you end up?
So my first posting, which wasn't a brilliant one, I didn't think it was a brilliant one, but it was in hindsight, was up to Scotland.
Okay.
As part of, so they had a unit up there called Comacchio Group, which was responsible for the security of nuclear warheads on the west coast of Scotland. So they did a couple of roles. One was sort of static security in Faslane, which is where the submarine base is on that coast down there. And also they did, when missiles were being moved around the country, there would be a unit that would go around behind them and keep them secure.
Cool.
So it was, I guess it was interesting in as much as it was very secretive at the time.
Yeah.
And what we were doing. We were pretty much living underground for a couple of weeks at a time.
Wow.
And constantly drilling, coming up and reacting to threats that were supposedly coming in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was there a lot of threats, or was it fairly all right?
There were. I mean, there was a huge there was a sort of Ministry of Defence police force up there that was sort of manning things 24/7, and we were the support, reactionary forces going out, and people were quite often trying to get across. So Greenpeace were up there, and there was a big constant camp up there. So people were trying to get in, but whether they were a real threat or not. And certainly I think within the Marines, it wasn't, at that time, it wasn't an ideal job. You were training for other things, and the guys would be stood around in these little trenches and going, "What am I doing, sir? This is nonsense." Some little hippie bloke running around out there. Is he really a threat? And we've got proper weapons and all the rest of it. It's not. So, but morale was so that wasn't the best posting. But I didn't spend long there, to be honest.
So obviously you're in. You don't want to give all your secrets away. But so when did you feel like you were actually doing what you really wanted to do and trained to do? Was it the next station, or did it take a few years?
The next. I spent under about 8-9 months. I mean, it's unusual. Normally you spend at least a year in post or 2 years, and then you move on.
Yeah.
But an opportunity came up, and I came back down to 4-2 Commando, and that was a operational commando unit. And those units rotate through, or the time they would rotate through jungle warfare training, desert training, Arctic training, so that they've always got an element that can be deployed very quickly.
Yeah.
And during my time with them as well, I did a Roermond tour in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So we were out, and we went out, ironically, just before the ceasefire was coming into play.
Yeah.
Which meant that there was a lot of emphasis, there was a lot of eyes on the units that were out there. and you do a year's build-up training before you go out, and then you spend this sort of intense 6-month period where you are keeping the peace in Northern Ireland at the time. And we were based in South Armagh, which at the time was, the ground was pretty much not controlled by the IRA, but there was no vehicle movement around the area. It was all just feet on the ground and helicopter movement around. And it was, I guess that was a bit of a turning point for me when I was in the forces, to see what we were doing, how we were being used. And it was a very political situation out there at the time. By that stage, I'm sure lots of people disagree, but I would argue that much of what was happening in terms of terrorist activity was basically organised crime within that area. And the intelligence behind it and the operations, it was very interesting to see the role that we played as men on the ground compared to the special forces that were out there, and then the government, what they're pushing. And there's all these different agendas going on, and really the guy on the ground ultimately was a walking target waiting to be shot at.
Wow.
In order to then try and capture these guys doing something illegal so that they could be put away. And we were working under very strict rules of engagement. Unless somebody was actually shooting at you, you weren't supposed to shoot back.
Right, okay.
And there was a strange thing at the time where we were made to wear very heavy body armor because there was a sniper that was operating in our area that had been taking people out. And which was we all felt it was a bit ridiculous as soldiers on the ground. This huge amount of armor that made it almost impossible to run or be mobile, to sort of protect you against a threat, which we knew that it was a 50 cal sniper rifle. So these things are sort of armor piercing. If that thing hits you in the chest, no amount of body armor is going to do anything for you. It can be accurate up to about a mile away. And so you can't even see the guy who's firing at you.
Yeah.
The round takes 5 seconds to get to you, so you don't hear it. And even if it's a near miss, just the aftershock going through is going to do some damage to you. So really wearing this stuff, you want to be mobile and moving around. You don't want to be weighed down by this.
It's an interesting one because you when you were like traveling, you were very much of the aspect, I'm going to be all right.
Yeah.
What did it feel like being in a situation where you could argue your life's a bit more on the line than it ever was?
Yeah.
Did you still have that sense of it's going to be all right, or was that aspect of, you really felt it, or was it just that you had to cope with it and that was what you all lived with?
Genuinely, my feeling was I'm going to be fine.
Yeah. Until
I get shot, and then obviously I'm going to be in trouble. But that even really wasn't an overriding thought. We knew what the threat level was, and you're really well drilled and trained, and you're surrounded by very capable people.
Yeah.
So that example of a sniper, if you know that you don't want to be sat down still for more than 5 or 6 seconds. You want to be moving, right? You don't want to be in a place where there's you're not protecting yourself from. These are simple things, but it's the level of professionalism, and everyone else around you is doing that.
Yeah.
And you also know that if something does happen, that you've got a capacity around you, and you know what the response would be behind you as well. So there is that degree of safety, but it is a strange environment because every day you're getting briefs on the threat. You are going looking for the threat. So your whole life is evolved around that. So there is a sort of, although you don't feel it at the time, there's an ongoing pressure building over time. But the truth of it, and I think for a lot of serving servicemen going out to those environments, you feel very alive because you've got to be switched on.
Yeah. So
everything's heightened. You are absolutely focused on what you're doing and paying attention and connected to people around you. And so it's a very exhilarating sort of feeling in that kind, if you've got the right people around you.
So you mentioned that you did training in sort of like in snow, in the desert, and obviously in the jungle and stuff. So then what was your longest sort of like stint somewhere? You mentioned jungle warfare. Is that where you ended up?
I mentioned that earlier because I loved that environment. I absolutely loved it. For me, it was a pure soldering environment, and comes with its own challenges. But I was incredibly lucky. I happened to pick up what's called a jungle warfare instructor's gig. So I went out there for.
Where did you go?
3 months. That was in Brunei.
Okay.
And so I spent quite a bit of time and was trained up by, I in fact had a Gurkha instructor with me. And the Gurkhas are brilliant out there.
Yeah, I had a friend who was in the Gurkhas.
Yeah, incredible. So I had this sergeant that was out there, a Nepalese guy who was just very quiet and really switched on to operating that environment. And it was just such a pure environment. You were relying on your senses the whole time, and you just got to be organized, really. If you get cut or you do those things, and it's a tiring environment. I lost a lot of weight when I was there for that. I was out there for an 12-week program.
And obviously people are not the only threat, right? There's
a lot of
and animals and all kinds of crazy things.
Exactly. And I think when you first get out there, I was a bit like, everyone's like, geez, what's going on? We were dragged out, and then
Was it noisy at night as well? Because I've heard
incredibly noisy. Again, it's that sort of switching the light off moment in that part of the world where it suddenly goes from daylight to pitch black, and when you're under the canopy as well, you just cannot see anything.
Yeah.
But the noise levels are incredible.
Yeah.
So we were still, the first night we went out there, we were as a sort of, introduce you to the jungle. They'd take us out there, and then we set up a harbour position, which is basically the name for where you set up in a circle so you're protected, and then you put sentries out at various points.
Yeah.
And you had to run string to the sentry points because you couldn't see anything. Wow. So 2 people are out in sentry, and then one guy will come back along the string, wake up the next guy to go out, and then you go along the string and meet the guy, and I'm sat there, and we weren't tactical. It was just to give us a feeling of what's going on. So we were still conversing with each other.
Yeah.
And we were sitting chatting, but it sounded like a helicopter flew between us, and we're both, what the is that?
Yeah.
Unbelievable, these huge bugs and stuff flying around. And so it's a bit of an over when you're first there, but it's incredible how your body adjusts to your environment.
Yeah.
And very quickly you get used to what seems, God, that's just a completely different world to me. You get adjusted to it quite quickly. And
obviously we're technically in peacetime, but did you find yourself in conflicts and things like that, or
it wasn't until after I left actually that I was in. I mean, Northern Ireland was, but not really. But it wasn't until after I left, and I ended up doing humanitarian and some security work in Iraq and Afghanistan for quite prolonged periods. But that's a very different experience to a military experience.
Yeah, of course.
So sort of going back to this idea of what you live and breathe in the military is threat level, security, safety. Where is the enemy? That's your constant dialogue going on.
Yeah.
Whereas the roles I did when I went out to firstly Afghanistan and then Iraq weren't really business roles, or there was some business development kind of work, but it was more humanitarian-based kind of work, and it's a very different environment. You're working with locals, connecting with people who have lived there and are working there and operating there, and your mindset is completely different.
Yeah.
But I felt very comfortable in those environments because I guess I had the training, and so when people were firing in the air or bombs were going off, you instinctively knew whether that was a threat or not a threat and how to respond. And
so it's in you then. It's like a DNA.
It's absolutely, and which isn't in place for other people. And again, so there was another fascinating period for me, especially in, I think, Iraq. I was out helping to support a health strengthening initiative, basically where they were going around their equivalent of our GP surgeries and helping them to modernize the way they connected their information and the way they looked after people. So they had brought in consultants from all over the globe to come into Baghdad and then be distributed out and support this network. So it was great work that was going on. A few of these consultants just were not mentally ready for that environment because it was quite active. And you look back now at that, it was 20 years ago or so, it was a real mess, actually, a real mess.
So did you, from you obviously leaving the army and then going into a different role, Was that an intentional decision, or you were a little bit lost and you thought, I just do something with my skills?
Yeah.
Because I hear a lot of the biggest challenge in the forces is that transition out of and into.
Yeah.
Is that where you found yourself? Or?
I feel I was really lucky, Daryl, that I had, during my time in Northern Ireland, I'd started feeling or getting the real interest in the psychology of performing in high stress environments.
Yeah.
So again, going back to the training, guys were dropping out. Why were they dropping out? Why were those of us who got through, what was the mentality there? What was the mindset? And I think the first book I read that really sort of woke me up to the whole thing was Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins, which I would have read when I was in Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. And that for me seeded the idea of there's something outside of the military that I am genuinely getting passionate about.
Yeah.
And I was in an operational role where my commanding officer was one of the most successful high-ranking officers in the Corps at the time. He'd been moved from Special Forces to this unit, 42 Commando, for this specific role of this 6 months because it was so sensitive.
Yeah.
And I was lucky in the job that I had. I was a junior subaltern, but I was head of, I was in charge of the surveillance in the area. Yeah. Which meant every evening I was in there sitting down for a meeting with the commanding officer, the head of intelligence, the head of operations, and then me, who hardly said anything. But these three guys above me were all, leading in their fields, really. And I remember sitting there thinking, God, this guy's right up there, but he's doing the same stuff I'm doing. Yeah. And he's away from his family for 6 months. And my belief at the time is, we're just running around after these guys who are criminals in essence. There's nothing we can really do. Yeah. It's sort of political point. And I started questioning, basically, what's my long-term role here in this kind of environment? So that was part of it. But then I think more importantly, I was getting a real passion for going, how do we mentally cope in this environment? How do we emotionally cope? And that set me on a completely different pathway. So when I finished my commission in the Marines, I knew what I wanted to do. So I was very lucky.
So, obviously, one of the things that is that the nature of the training and essentially makes you resilient. Yeah, that's often the thing that comes out of going through the forces. You become more resilient in what you do.
Yeah.
But is there any other training other than experience? I've stuck it out longer than anyone else, so therefore now I'm more resilient. Was there any other training around the aspects of your mind and keeping it sharp or whatever? Or was that a journey that you had to go and discover separately? Like you said, you're reading the book and psychology. Did that psychology play any part in it, or is it more circumstantial?
I think in the Marines, I don't talk about it as being we're going to training the mind, but when you study it and you look back on it, you go, well, actually, there was real method in that.
Yeah, got you.
There's real method in someone screaming in your face because, we're born with two natural fears, which is one is the fear of falling and one is the fear of loud noises. That does an automatic fear response in the body and we're in fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
So a lot of, looking back on it, and I did some other courses as well where 3 o'clock in the morning, people are banging, lights all come on, people screaming in your face, get outside. And so you're from a deep sleep into panic mode.
Yeah.
The definition I like of resilience is about the speed with which you come back to normality. So resilience of a physical object, you can bend it, and how quickly it rights itself is how resilient it is and how much strain it can take. So how quickly you can rebalance yourself in that environment. So by just going through it, then you're learning that. And the other one I loved in the Corps was this phrase, which was a dislocation of expectation. So you would be, right, okay, we're going to be walking all night and you're going to be picked up at 6 o'clock in the morning. You've got to get to this location by then. Yeah. And you're like, Christ, you've got to navigate yourself to get there. And it's always very tight. Your route down to it, you'd see the trucks waiting for you. You'd get within a couple of 100 meters of it and the trucks would just start up and just drive off. And one of the instructors would be there, say, right, sorry guys, there was a change in plan. You've now got to do another 10K up to this location. Off you go. Again, So you're carried along, boom, again, the trucks would disappear. So this would happen 2 or 3 times. Then, right, we're going to just sleep again for the night. So you've now done a whole day extra. But it's not so much about how hard they're pushing you. It's more to do with when you're exhausted and things change quickly. How quickly do you just get back on with what you do?
Do you get to that point where, this is what they're going to do now eventually? Do you kind of almost anticipate that was going to happen?
I don't know whether it's because I have a general level of stupidity where I just thought, this is fine, I just crack on with it, or whether it was really resilience being built up in me. Yeah. But I never reached a point where I just thought, I can't do any more. So
you've got all this experience, all this background. You've now, you've gone from being in the army and then obviously security and stuff like that in effectively dicey situations, and particularly not the areas that you choose to visit. Let's go to Afghanistan and places like that. So when did you think of collectively taking that knowledge then and then bringing it into what you're doing now? I mean, how did that start to formulate?
Timeline wise, there was a period when I left the forces where I was focused on therapeutic training.
Yeah.
So I retrained as a therapist, spent 4.5 years training as a hypnotherapist and counsellor. I also did NLP for a number of years. Yep. And then I went into practice in London.
Okay.
And then we set up basically I worked for a period as a physical training instructor as well. So I retrained as a physical training instructor and was working in corporate wellness and fitness, running the gym for Walt Disney at the time for a company called Tweed Park. And I did that for about a year or so, and then realised I really don't like working for other people, which I think is probably true for most entrepreneurs. And then really started working for myself from that moment onwards. And the first business we set up was a wellness business. It was slightly different we went away from the gym idea more into, I guess you could describe them as holistic practices. So the yogas and the physiotherapies. And so we took over that side of things, or we offered those services, and we had quite a bit of success early on. Mm-hmm. We were, our 2 big clients were HSBC and the BBC.
Oh wow!
And so we had therapists working across the whole of the UK, and then we had about a dozen or so other smaller businesses. So the profit margins weren't great. We were working hard and not being successful at that stage. I think we were 3 years into it, or 2.5, 3 years into it. And that's when 9/11 happened.
Right.
And that was just like somebody had turned the tap off at that point. All money spent on well-being and just stopped. Just absolutely stopped, because there was that crash in the economy.
Yeah, I remember it.
So we went from that to nothing overnight, and had to sort of let go of a whole bunch of people. And so that was an interesting process to go through. But it was during that process that I was approached by a former colleague who said, look, this is opportunity in Afghanistan, which was absolutely fascinating. And so I took that, and then that led on to 4 or 5 years doing that type of work in and around, before I then came back and started again something new.
So, interestingly, you go from almost working front end, heightened stress and that, and then you're working with corporates, which is almost the antithesis. It's the opposite, where you're in a big company, everything's taken care of. Did you was that sense of taking that other opportunity, that sense of adventure again? I'm off on yet another adventure.
Yeah.
That spark. Is that the best way to put it? Where it's almost like you were being normalized or domesticated, and it's like, I want you to do this, and you were like, ooh.
I was very excited, and I really enjoyed it, and I was extremely lucky with what I got, and I spent a good period of time consulting for the UN as well, which is a great experience to be in that kind of environment, and that was in northern Pakistan during the earthquake disaster.
Wow.
So that was a great job, and really opened my eyes up to how that large organisation works, how that sort of charitable organisation works. By the time I'd sort of finished those roles, I was ready to come back and do something different. And I ended up spending a number of years working in the mental health sector,
right,
on the charitable side. And I actually spent quite a bit of time doing on the ground sort of care work.
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly poorly paid role. It's unbelievable. The amount of I guess, responsibility that care workers have, especially dealing with sort of complex mental health issues. So I was working with a charity that ran homes for those that were coming out of long-time hospitalization, or they had been incarcerated and were suffering from mental ill health, and then they were being released. And these individuals were really trying to get their lives back together, trying to build basic skills while also trying to manage complex mental health issues. So all of them were on medication, some of them multiple sources of medication, constant or regular sort of psychotic moments. And these homes were in residential locations, and the workers there's role was to help these people normalize and then get back into society. So it was a lot of weight on the shoulders of the carers. Working really hard and long hours and shift duty and all the rest of it. So that, for me, that was fascinating, because that, we talk about stress for people in corporate environments or care environments or in dangerous environments. And I think sometimes we sort of say, oh, it's really dangerous, people are shooting at you. But actually, you can be in a corporate situation or a family situation where you're under financial pressure, or you are unsure about what you want to do in your work, or you're not getting on with the people around you. And the anxiety that you're experiencing is probably the same as somebody that is, because emotions are emotions at the end of the day.
Well, you know what you know, right? So you've made a conscious decision that I'm going to the jungle in a roundabout way. But like in the care environment, maybe some of that stuff is a bit more of a surprise because you're not expecting what you're having to deal with, or the person like loses their job and they've got no money. It's like that's put on you. You didn't expect that to happen, and I think that for me was, where a lot of people said they really struggled in COVID. I know that's why they struggled, is because what they were used to. It's interesting thing you said about expectation. They had an expectation that this job would be around forever. They had an expectation that they were indispensable. And then they get told, well, we're going to put you on furlough, which is one way, the step before we made you redundant. And I remember talking to people like going, I'm on furlough. But they weren't like going, oh, I'm just going to enjoy it. They were like, I'm on furlough because I know they're going to get rid of us. And it was them having to deal with that. It's great to have 3 or 4 months off, but they know at the end of those 3 and 4 months they're going to lose their job. And it was them having to deal with that. And I think that's kind of where I got to, where I'm networking online and connecting with people online, and the people that got through it had that healthy attitude to crisis, where they were like, okay, they've almost reconciled, we're going to expect the worst, and if the worst happens we'll be able to pivot and do something else. And they got through it. Or there were the people like, the sky is falling down, and it is falling down, and then when it falls down, I ain't going to cope. And it's just to see, it was almost like a split. You could see people online, those that were happy, they haven't got all the answers. They don't know if they're going to be around in 6 months, but they're like, well, I'm just going to give it a go anyway.
Absolutely.
And then you've got the other people that are like going, I don't know what I'm going to do. And you could just see them fold in within themselves and not turning up. And it was almost the worst thing. Like not turning up. Was it like we're all in this together, and you've isolated yourself to just suffer alone, and it was difficult. But thankfully, the network that we were part of, there was a lot of checking behind the scenes. Look, how's it really going? And how you are. But I think the overriding thing is it was definitely a mental pressure, thing that was draining. And you've come out of it, and some people are not back to where they were.
And it's not something we're taught in school. No. And I think my passion right now in life is to help people understand how to navigate through that process, what you've just described. It's isolation is the one thing that really destroys human beings. When we connect and we work as a group or a community, then it's incredibly powerful. And I've had lots of periods, and right now I'm living in the middle of Wales, in the middle of nowhere. I'm relatively isolated. But when you're in that isolation, where you bring your attention, which is the big thing, what you're giving your mental energy to dictates what you experience in the moment, because everything happens in the moment, right? It's not, we think about the past, or we imagine the future, but these things they're not real.
No.
They're part of the way we're using our brain. Yet the real thing is how we feel by doing that. And so those people that are catastrophizing the future are actually experiencing a lot of heaviness and a lot of uncomfortableness in themselves. And most people aren't aware they're even doing that.
No, it's an interesting one because there's an exercise that we do in humans, which is another company I'm involved with. And one of the things is we've got a thing called the game plan that you can download for free. You go www.humanswitha4.co.uk and you download the game plan. And one of the exercises is get your phone out and look at the pictures.
Yeah.
But look at those pictures. Don't just go, oh, that was a good moment. Think about what you were thinking about in that time. And the overriding thing that comes out was they weren't present.
Yeah.
They were worrying about the next day or the week after or the month forward. And the overriding thing that comes out of it goes, I wish I was in the present more.
Yeah.
That if I knew that I'm still around now, looking back 6 months, a year later, I'd have enjoyed that more.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was a common theme across every time we do it. It's a common theme across everybody. And I look at it and I go, I look at pictures and I go, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But I wasn't fully committed. I was half there because I had one eye on emails or text messages or whatever else.
And that's where right at the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about as kids being out and about, you were present because you were trying to keep yourself alive, jumping off trees and all the rest of it. But it's a skill. I mean, it's a skill that we can all develop. And much of the challenge of today, although there's some amazing stuff going on with AI and with social media, if it's used correctly, we are losing ourselves in some respect, and that ability to connect with ourselves and be in the moment. And that's hidden. You can't see how I'm feeling. You can see how I'm behaving towards you, but you don't actually see what I'm thinking or feeling. And yet, that is in essence how I experience life. And if I'm not paying attention to that, or I don't know how to pay attention to that, or hold my attention on something, then I'm losing out on my life.
I think you're right. I think most people are escaping from the present rather than enjoying the present. Like the doom scroll I pick up, and then 25 minutes, an hour later, I'm still watching falling off a car, or like falling off a scooter, or cats doing silly things. But ultimately, you're looking for something. It's weird. It's like I remember, even yesterday, we had our Christmas tree up, and we knew we had to move it, and I popped my back out, and I was like sat there going, oh, what am I going to do now? I need to do something. And it was like, I could watch this, but I don't want to watch this. I want to do something productive. It's like, oh, let's go and wrestle the tree down and get rid of it, which we did. But I think it's such a go-to now that when we haven't got anything to do, whereas we'll go and have a conversation. Or go and talk to one of your kids or your other half, or go for a walk. It's literally whenever there's a gap, we're almost pre-programmed subconsciously to go there. But when we were kids, it was like, right, I've eaten, which is now fuel. I'm out. We're off out somewhere else. And I mean, we definitely missed that. So, Jeremy, what about now? What was the future? What's the future look like for you? You said you've got a few things coming up.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I guess my primary focus is on getting out and helping people to understand how they can better manage themselves in terms of their emotional resilience, emotional intelligence, which is such a useful thing to develop, especially for leaders and people dealing with what we're describing, living in the current world at this moment in time. And what are the skills that you can develop as an individual to make you not just happier in yourself, but more productive and more effective in the world around you, which is, for me, is an inside-out game. We're human beings that live usually from the outside in.
Agree.
Everything comes into us, and the idea of actually starting inside and going, well, actually, if I'm in a really good place, that means my decisions going forward are going to be far better for me than when I'm stressed and feeling uncomfortable and going, well, if I grab my phone, that takes me away from that feeling. And it's almost counterintuitive. Like a physical injury or physical pain, you can see and you can administer to. Emotional pain and discomfort, because people aren't taught the process of healing that, most of us go, what the hell's that? And we go straight to a mental idea of, well, is it because this person said that, or because something I did in my past, or this because I'm going to have no money in the future? The mind is jumping around, and we'll find something that fits the emotion. So our mind is like it's, so we absorb things through our senses. Therefore, any memory that you have will have what you saw, what you heard, what you smelled, tasted, touched, and emotionally how you felt.
Yeah.
So if you access that memory, which you were saying about earlier.
Yeah, with the photo.
With the photos, you access that memory, you'll be able to remember or pick out, you should be able to, any of those 5 senses.
Yeah.
Plus the 6th sense is how you feel. The only thing that's real for you is how you feel in that moment.
Yeah.
So that's where the shift comes subtly.
Yeah.
And understanding how that process works, which is, it's not rocket science, a lot of this stuff, but it doesn't mean it's easy to do.
No, it isn't. And as you said, the more we're in bed with technology, the less in tune we are with ourselves.
Yeah.
The easier it is. It's a place we easily go there, and then you get that message, don't you, that says you spent this amount of time on your phone, and you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
You know, and or this amount of time in a certain app. And I think the biggest thing I see in society is being present in the present is probably one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
And that's not whether you're a phone addict or not. I think it's definitely that. Like, I'm an entrepreneur, so you would spend half your time living life in the future.
Yeah. Which is necessary. It's part, it's a good thing to do.
It's part of it, but you still need to like deal with the day to day and live in the day to day. And maybe when you're out with your kids, you're still not plotting the future. Just enjoy that moment before. Yeah. My kids my eldest now is 17, nearly 18. And it's like, where did that go?
Yeah.
I'm just like, wow. And so, really conscious of that in the present, because she's not going to be around forever. 27, she ain't going to be living with us. Well, hopefully not.
You never know.
But do you know what I mean? It's like life begins again, and I think that certainly as an entrepreneur and a business owner and doing those things, is that living life in the present is a big skill. Whereas before we would take it for granted, it's almost we have to force ourselves to do it.
Yeah, it's that sort of turning inwards is where the present is, and that can seem like a small world, but in fact it's not. It's the opposite.
Yeah,
it's where everything is taking place, and that might sound a bit woo-woo maybe, but so to answer your question, that's a passion for mine at the moment is how can I pass that information on?
Yeah, okay.
Through either digital training, through talks, through connecting with corporations and speaking to their leadership groups about this, because these are really useful skills, not just for productivity, but also for the individual. And what's interesting is you work one-to-one with people, and there's a never-ending supply of conversation because we'll never learn everything about ourselves. There's always new things to explore. There's always new things to develop.
I said this a lot, definitely looking at 2 different countries. We look the same, but we're not the same, which is the UK and the US, for example. The US are a lot more open to talk about what's going on internally, a lot more open to have conversations, to explore and spend time trying to figure self out. And I think the UK stiff upper lip, let's keep it quiet, we'll soldier on, there's that thing. And I am seeing this emergence now where people are going, you know what, actually, I'm not great, thanks. And I need a community or people to share that with and talk to. So whether it's a network online or whether it's meeting up with a group of people, I think it's becoming a lot more important now. People are realizing they can't do life alone.
Yeah, and I really think that's growing. I mean, that's one of the beauties of, I have a very optimistic outlook of where the world is going. Yeah. And I think a lot of that, there are hidden communities on using the internet who are connecting in a positive way. Yeah. When actually so much of what we see from mainstream media, from input is negative. Yes. This is going wrong, that's going wrong. But the reality, and I feel from my travels and I feel really blessed to have worked in so many places, that people, generally are really good. And they want to have good lives and that connection and communities working together and stuff. So there's that individual stuff I'm working on at the moment, but I'm also in the process of looking at a social enterprise to support basically groups, traumatized groups from conflict and displacement. How do we help them with their trauma recovery journey? Yeah, okay. So I know we haven't probably got that much time, but my grandfather was a teacher in China at the beginning of the Second World War. He was headmaster of Tinsin School. My grandmother had 2 young children, was pregnant with my father, went into a Chinese hospital. When she came out with my father, it was under Japanese control. And my father spent the first 4 years of his life in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. Wow. So the family were displaced through that process.
Yeah.
They survived, made their way back to the UK, couldn't get work there, went to Africa, went to a couple of places working in Africa. They were in southern Sudan in the 50s. When the Sudanese civil war kicked off, their family were in a home there and got displaced again because so they had to get in the back of a vehicle and leave a second home and everything and come and settle again. So within my family history, there's this sort of connection to displacement and the trauma that comes from that. And those generations, that was never talked about as trauma. People just got on and dealt with things.
Yeah, you're right.
But it does affect communities and the way they cope and the way that they get themselves back on their feet. So, there's a lot of evidence of those groups really needing support. And so I'm looking at the moment of a combination of using digital online training to reach out to individuals and groups, and then bringing groups together for peer-supported kind of work.
Great.
Understanding what the pathway of trauma recovery looks like. Yeah. And what personal skills you can develop to help yourself through that, and how you support each other as a community, and then set up active communities for that purpose. So at the moment, I'm looking at that and various sort of refugee communities and those affected by trauma. No,
it's an interesting one, because I've seen, like even now, even in business, people have been displaced.
Yeah.
That's the reality, is they've got a job somewhere, as you said, for life, and now they've been displaced because they've I've heard some stories where people have been working online and with view to go and living in another country, and then it's got a bit harder and they just said, wow, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And they've sold the house, they've got rid of stuff, and now they're like, well, we can't live here anymore, but now where are we going to go?
Yeah.
So, it's I think the thing with COVID got everybody to deal with stuff that they never would deal with. One, unexpected events, because we're kind of quite all right in the UK. We don't have like the storms and but now we're having to deal with something really unexpected. Whereas like in another country like LA, for example, with the wildfires, it's unexpected. And then you had to deal with the aspect of, how do you come back from it? There's no manual. No one says, oh, this is what you do when the worst happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of working with people to come through that is absolutely needed, where there's a community where you can go, I didn't know how I was going to get through it. And that's for me why I got networking. It was almost like in a way, therapy every week. We weren't trying to do business. We were just trying to get through and come out to the other side. And that's never left me, that essence of community, because I think, as you said earlier on, isolation is not a great place to be, and living in community is. In other cultures, it's all about living with community. And they said like a whole town brings up a child.
Yes, exactly.
It's just that mentality. Whereas I'll just get on, leave mum to get on with it, and dad's working 18 hours a day. It's just so different. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we have these communities forming online. Yeah, and then they really step into their power when people come together from those communities, like we are now. We met online, and now we're chatting about stuff and. Yeah, so I have a lot of faith in the way things are going. And I think in my experience, when there's been a huge amount of struggle or challenge going on for an individual or a group, that's often where the biggest lessons are learned in life. And when you move through those, you're in a far, far better place, a far stronger place.
And my thing is that we don't lose those lessons as well.
No, exactly.
Like whatever you've gone through and you've come through to the other side.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't lose the lessons on that journey. Why? Because ultimately you can then pass them on to someone else and help them, build on the shoulders of someone rather than start all over again.
Yes, exactly.
So
exactly.
Well, Jeremy, how do we get hold of you? LinkedIn, I guess, would probably be the best place.
Yeah, LinkedIn, absolutely. At the moment, that's the best place to track me down.
Okay.
I'll be breaking out of Pembrokeshire soon.
All right. I've watched this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Brilliant.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Purpose People podcast. How you can help us is to like and subscribe our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google and Amazon. That helps us get our message out there to help people go after their dreams, double down on it, and be successful in life on their terms.